Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this discussion hosted by the Program on Extremism here at George Washington University. My name is Sergio Altuna, Senior Fellow here at the program, and I'm honored to moderate today's event titled ISKP's Evolving Role, Regional Stronghold Global Reach. The structure of the event, for those not familiar with it, is quite simple, and it will run for approximately 1.5 hour, maybe a bit shorter day, 75 minutes maybe. Each panelist will deliver a 15-20 minute presentation on various aspects of the main topic, and following these presentations, we will transition into a Q&A session where a panelist will have the opportunity to to address questions from the audience. We, of course, encourage you to actively participate by submitting your questions through the chat feature. We hope, of course, this interactive format allows for a dynamic exchange of ideas and fosters engagement between the speakers and the and the attendees. Of course, we'll look forward to your insightful queries. I'm really excited to facilitate this event with our esteemed panelists, to whom I'd like to extend my warmest welcome. Before diving into the discussion, allow me just to introduce them in the order they will speak. Today, the program on extremism is honored to host Dr. Amira Jaddoun, who's an assistant professor at Clemson University, and who, prior to joining Clemson University, worked also at the Combating Terrorism Center at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Her research explores the multifaceted consequences of international security tools and counterterrorism strategies, examining the interlinkages with political violence, extremism, and the strategic dissemination of this information. She's also the author of a recent and very well-known book, The Islamic State in Afghanistan and Pakistan, Strategic Rivalries and Alliances. Of course, I encourage you to buy it and read it. And she's also a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center and an associate editor at the European Journal of International Security. Well, she's also, by the way, or she was the Center of Strategic and International Studies, if I might say, named Dr. Jaddoun as one of the 50 honorees in the U.S. National Security and Foreign Affairs Leadership list in 2022. Amira, Mrs. Jaddoun, welcome. And today also with us is Dr. Attal Ahmedzai, who's a visiting assistant professor at Colby College. Professor Ahmedzai's research focuses on the government structures of armed and non-state actors in South Asia, including, of course, Islamic State Khorasan. His work has been featured in both academic and mainstream publications, including, of course, Perspectives on Terrorism, Foreign Policy, and many others. He frequently serves as a commentator on security and terrorism issues across Southwestern and Central Asia, and his current research focuses on analyzing online content and propaganda produced by ISKP in Pashto, Dari, Urdu, Arabic, and English. Thank you very much also, Dr. Ahmedzai, for having accepted POA's invitation today. Allow me just a very brief introduction before leaving the floor to the real experts in the issue we're approaching today. In recent years, the Islamic State Khorasan province has evolved into more than just the South and Central Asian branch of ISIS. It has become, or it has arguably become, one of the organization's most dynamic and ambitious affiliates. From its early days of insurgency in Afghanistan, the group has evolved into a force responsible for high-profile attacks beyond its immediate regional sphere of operations. This threat, of course, has not gone unnoticed, right? Actually, the recent annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community, published just maybe less than a week ago by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, underscores this alarming trend. Just let me quote from it. ISKP is a group's ISIS branch most capable of carrying out external terrorist attacks and maintains the intent to conduct attacks in South and Central Asia and globally. Although always, of course, according to the assessment, its capabilities may vary. Recent trends with high-profile attacks outside its immediate area of operations and several networks and attacks thwarted both in Europe and the US highlight the group's expanding capability beyond its original stronghold and its ability to inspire individuals to conduct attacks abroad. Now, of course, many in our audience will likely recall ISKP's high-profile attacks beyond its traditional area of operations, including January 24 attack in Kerman in Iran during the anniversary celebrations of Qasem Soleimani's death, which resulted, if I'm not mistaken, in nearly 100 fatalities, or the to name just another one, the March 2024 attack at the Crocus City Hall in Moscow. The deadliest, of course, terrorist attack on Russian soil in over 2 decades, with over 130 people dead. However, of course, ISKP has also carried numerous operations, terrorist attacks within its core area of influence. Let's just mention the 2021 Kabul airport attack, which killed 13 American personnel, and also over 170 Afghan nationals during the U.S. Withdrawal from Afghanistan, or the twin suicide bombings I recall right now, and I believe it was July 2018. At an election rally in Pakistan, or even the July 2023 suicide bombing and at an assembly of Islamic clerics rally in Pakistan, with also scores of fatalities. But other than the attacks, let us also briefly remember that the political landscape in the region has changed significantly since ISKP's emergence back in 2015. It's been almost a decade. The US withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 and the Taliban's subsequent takeover have reshaped security dynamics, uh, creating a radically different scenario for jihadist groups. Well, the Taliban, of course, have launched sustained operations against the ISKP. The governance and the security policies have failed to eradicate the group's insurgency. Meanwhile, of course, tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan further complicate counterterrorism efforts. And of course, this environment has allowed ISKP to exploit security vacuums and expand its operational reach. Just to mention one other aspect, ISKP's communication strategy, which I believe Dr. Ahmed Zay will cover in detail. It's also worth being examined because it somehow reflects the branch expanding ambitions. Through its Lazam Foundation, the group has developed a very sophisticated media apparatus, producing content in multiple languages. Um, Having into account that it's not a group that I track daily, I've been able to find in Tajik, in Uzbek, in Russian, and several language, and I think the list is just growing. And of course, without forgetting its flagship magazine, uh, Saud Khorasan, or the Voice of Khorasan, which has played a central role in disseminating ideological justifications for attacks, of course, but also inciting supporters to carry operations with minimal logistical support. Now, ISKP's increasing role in higher profile operations, as the ones I've just mentioned, coupled with its growing media presence, both by creating its own product, but also by being regularly featured in ISIS central key media products such as Al Naba or official leadership statements. has even fueled debate over its evolving position within the whole ISIS organization. In fact, at one point, I think it was last year, there was even speculation that ISKP had effectively become the main component, if I may say, of ISIS external intelligence operations division, or I think it's better known by the name Emni or Amn al-Dawla in Arabic. And so ISKP has transitioned from a regional insurgency without, of course, abandoning this regional activity into a crucial node within ISIS structure, capable of both, I'd say, orchestrating major attacks and inspiring lone actors worldwide. Um, Understanding this process and its far-reaching consequences will be, of course, one of the central topics of our discussion today. And with this in mind, and without further delay, let me just yield the floor to Dr. Amira Jadoun. Welcome again, Amira, who will discuss a bit the origins of the group and how they've exploited the local landscape to establish themselves, as well as the branch's evolution post Taliban takeover. Amira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and Sergio for the introduction and for to the whole POE team for organizing this event on a very critical topic. So that was actually a really great overview of the ISKP threat from its origins to all the way till today, whatever it's morphed into, which we'll be talking about. But I just wanted to make a few big points. So I will be focusing on giving our audience the big picture of the environment within which ISK first emerged and then continues to adapt and evolve within quite successfully, as we sort of see its development. And some of the insights that I'll be talking about are not just based on my book, obviously, but it's a group. ISKP is a group that I have been studying pretty much since its origin and following its evolution. And it's really remarkable seeing how it continues to adapt to fit its changing environment. Sort of as Sergio mentioned, that the environment that we see in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region today is drastically different than the one when the US was still present in the region and ISKP was more of a regional threat. So to start off with, again, like I said, the big picture. So we are here now in 2025. We first started hearing about ISKP back in late 2014. So the group has showed that it has endured and has longevity. So as Sergio mentioned, we've had two recent assessments come out around ISKP. We had the UN report and obviously the US intel community report about ISKP. And what's really coming forth is that ISK has transitioned into more of a transnational threat. But it's not exactly planning and launching attacks from Afghanistan, right? So there's different components of this ISKP threat, which pose threats to different actors, whether they're actors in the region or whether they're Western states. So some of the things that we see here, which are concerning for Western states, are ISKP's persistence in the region, but also its global ambitions. And Western states keep finding individuals who've been self-radicalized or have linkages with this group. So these are all causes for concern. So now that we know that in 2025, ISKP is still considered a threat, but something that has changed, I want to sort of focus in on the environment within which ISKP first emerged. Just a few brief overall high-level insights, because I think this environment continues to allow groups like ISKP to rebuild and reemerge. So really what you see here on the slide is that there's three critical junctures temporally in the region, which I think really influenced jihadism in South Central Asia, really to a deep level. Now, first of all, of course, we have the time period of the Cold War, the Russian invasion in the region, and this is where we see the subsequent rise of Al-Qaeda. Which claims this AfPak region as its home base. And we see a rise in sectarian violence and also proxy warfare. Now, the next period is critical when we think about ISKP, right? We had a 20-year war on terror, during which we see the landscape shift immensely. We see the emergence of Islamic State, obviously, which brings transnational rivalries into the region, but we also see a big surge in anti-government militancy, primarily the Pakistani Taliban. But what's critical here and important for ISKP is that we're seeing a lot more cooperation between groups as a means to sort of withstand the intense counterterrorism pressure in the region. And now we're finally in this stage where the US has withdrawn, and we see the Taliban's takeover 3+ years. And this has had, again, two distinct effects. First of all, it has emboldened jihadists, but most importantly, for groups like ISKP, it has created this space for them to actually strategize and continue to develop and reemerge as a threat. So, in essence, when you think about the landscape in Afghanistan, Pakistan, we see a very fragmented jihadist threat in the region, right? Which has been historically developed and influenced by local dynamics, but also global events. So we see anti-state groups, right? We have ethno-nationalist insurgencies like the Baloch insurgent groups. We've had sectarian outfits in the region for a while. We also have state-linked Kashmir groups. And then we have Al-Qaeda and Islamic State's presence, right? So ISKP has taken advantage of this environment because a lot of these groups have overlapping agendas and goals, and they can find common grounds over which to cooperate. And this really has been one of the key sources of ISKP's emergence and its continued power. So really, just to give you a little bit of background, so ISKP, like I said, first started to emerge 2014, 2015, but we have to remember that in its origin sort of period, it was really made up of TTP commanders, Al-Qaeda commanders who had defected, and some Taliban leaders as well. Since then, it has obviously become a much different organization with a lot more diversity within its ranks. But these are sort of the origins of this group. And subsequently, in 2016, we see the announcement of Islamic State Jammu and Kashmir, which sort of has morphed into, I would argue, Islamic State Hind and Islamic State Pakistan, which were additional entities which Islamic State announced around mid-2019. So Islamic State Khorasan essentially is an official affiliate of the Islamic State, um, Islamic State's project of creating a caliphate. So ISK's goals closely align with its parent organization, which is to create a caliphate, but its operational focus has remained on the historical region, the Khorasan region, which encompasses parts of modern-day South and Central Asia. Right. So this goal mirrors the broader ISIS vision, but it has a localized geographical focus. Now, what the puzzle is about ISKP, as I mentioned, it sort of emerged in this environment, but it had a lot of challenges. It was up against a lot of challenges, right? So first, the region was already saturated. It had a host of militant groups. So was there really room for ISKP? Secondly, we already have Al-Qaeda's presence in the region. So is there room for another transnational group? But what we see over the years is that ISK turned all these challenges into opportunities. Essentially, by adopting this strategy, which we focus in on our book, the main argument is that ISK was very intentional in choosing its alliances where it had overlapping goals, overlapping opponents, and even ideology, but not in all cases. But on the other hand, equally important for ISK's strategy was to provoke rivalries. Now, obviously, we have seen this most intensely with the Taliban, but this rivalry between the Taliban and ISK has been there since its origin days and continues. And it serves this purpose of differentiating ISKP's brand in this very saturated region because if ISKP was naturally to align itself with groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in this region, then there wouldn't really be any need for a new entity. So this has been an essential component of its strategy overall. And I just wanted to show you a quick snapshot of ISKP's leadership in its early 3 years, and where we coded the sort of former affiliations of its militant base. And you can see here that part of ISKP's strength is its ability to recruit poach members from other groups and even absorb entire factions, which it did initially in its initial years. As we know, by 2019, ISKP was facing a significant decline. So between 2018 and 2019, on the chart here, you can see the drastic drop in ISKP's capacity. This was in part driven by U.S. operations in combination with Afghan forces on the ground, but simultaneously, on the right side, what you see with the blue and red bars, we have to remember that ISKP was constrained in 2019 as a result of multiple actors acting against it, including the Taliban. So the red bars and the blue bars that you see indicate operations against ISK by Taliban and the Afghan government, right? So we have to remember that there was this intense pressure in previous years, which allowed us to constrain ISKP, and it wasn't just the Taliban, which is something that we need to keep in mind when we consider the Taliban's inefficacy in constraining ISKP. Now, as I mentioned, 2019 is where we see a decline in ISKP's capacity, and this is when we see a change in ISKP's strategy. So they had immense territorial losses, personnel losses, leadership losses. So it's a weakened organization in 2021. But it sort of flipped this around by saying, okay, we no longer have the burden of defending territories. So they kind of take on, again, revert to the IS model of insurgency, where the goal then becomes to inflict harm on the enemy until the time is right to, again, start regaining control of territory. So here, subsequently, we see ISKP pivot, and there is a resurgence that we see, which was building up prior to the Taliban's complete takeover, but we see a really sudden increase in ISKP's attacks post 2021, which what lasted into 2022. Now, I just want to sort of transition a little bit before I hand it over to our other panelist, is what is this new environment that ISKP finds itself in, right? So, first of all, it's obvious that with the US withdrawal, the absence of US-led CT operations obviously means that ISKP has a lot more leeway. But the militant landscape is equally important, right? So the Taliban's transition from an insurgency for 20 years into a state actor has shifted the militant landscape, which means all of the other militant factions, which were previously aligned or linked to the Taliban insurgency, which was a central node, they no longer have that umbrella that the Taliban used to provide as a militant group. So ISK has stepped in or is attempting to step in to capture this market, right, which has existed in the region. And this is why we see it's the narratives, which Dr. Ahmadzai will talk about, shift, right? We see not just a focus on other countries in the region, but also an attempt to mobilize sympathizer outside of the immediate region. So these two, I think, characteristics of the changed landscape have really influenced ISKP's trajectory. But at the organizational level, there are some other things which have been working for ISKP. So first of all, its leader, Al-Muhajir, is, like I said, closely following the IS model of insurgency, which means that they have focused in on more targeted assassinations or sectarian attacks. The goal being to inflict harm upon the enemy, conduct targeted assassinations of government and religious leaders and Shia communities, right? You're using this approach to weaken your opponent. Now, on the other side, we see ISK expand its propaganda immensely. And I believe that ISKP is currently the one affiliate of ISIS which is publishing in the largest number of languages is propaganda. So it's definitely got it's ambitious in its international agenda. And its multilingual propaganda, like I said, isn't really just recruiting from Central and South Asia, but it's also aiming to galvanize Muslims in the West, which is a huge concern for Western states. A few things. So a part of this, what we're seeing operationally, the outcomes, observable outcomes of this intentional approach to diversify its ranks, to diversify its opponents, as we can see from its propaganda. We have seen attacks in neighboring countries in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, obviously Iran, Pakistan. We have seen links to international plots, and we continue to see a series of arrests of individuals who either arrived in Western states or are already based here, which have been inspired on their own to sort of align themselves with ISKP or have even made attempts to travel. So this is definitely, there's many indicators which are showing this is a growing problem and is also indicative of ISKP's influence in the digital realm. Again, these are just some examples of the attacks that we saw. Really, these types of high profile attacks really reinforce the narrative of ISKP and make it more credible. And it's really helpful in getting the group greater access to funds and recruits. And finally, I want to end on this slide by saying that, you know, there's sort of a tension where should we think about ISK as a localized threat, or is it really a transnational threat, right? Is it part of a transnational group, the Islamic State network, or is it a local entity? And I think there's a little bit of both going on here, and we can't lose sight of either one, because I think Islamic State is also sort of changing its structure, and we should see ISK as a part of Islamic State's network in the sense that Islamic State Central has an interest in sustaining this affiliate, which is boosting its reputational globally and really delivering many strategic advantages to Islamic State as a whole, and more specifically to ISKP. So with that, I think I can. There we go. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amira, for providing such enlightening insights. Before yielding the floor to Dr. Ahmed Zai, let me just remind everybody that you can start sending questions through the Q&A for the Q&A session through the Q&A feature. So please send them all the way so we can make the most out of our time with Dr. Jaddoun and Dr. Ahmed Zay. And as I say, Dr. Atal Ahmed Zay will provide also a brief review of the group's ongoing activities with a special focus on propaganda. Thank you, Amira, for preparing the ground for that. It has been a great introduction with a lot of insights to the evolution of the group, and also Dr. Ahmed Zay. I believe he will cover a bit of the group's narratives and its different target audiences, providing the high amount of languages they are starting to use to boost this digital influence that Dr. Jadoun was mentioning. Dr. Ahmed Zay, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Altona. Do you hear me? Uh,
Loud
okay,
and clear.
perfect. So, and after a comprehensive presentation like what Dr. Jadoun presented, I don't have much to offer, but I will try my best. So, as you said, my analysis or inferences are mostly based on the digital footprint of ISIS-K. And they're like, as you mentioned, like they're like publishing a lot. So what I will do is mostly, I do not have slides, but I decided to provide more a narrative. And that decision is also a type of performative decision because narrative is what the ISIS-K's reason data is embedded in narrative, a very medieval narrative of Black Flag or the Khorasan narrative. But it is also, its strategy is somehow oriented or socialized within presenting different types of narrative. And also my analytical framework is also a type of like narrative analysis or or thematic analysis, discourse analysis. So I will start it with a couple of quotes, which there was a type of like a battle of words between TTP or Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan and ISIS-K. So Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, to present itself as a less radical or less extremist organization, somehow claim that the sentence that they say the translation is that ISIS-K is a collection of the most extremist elements of the Islamic groups in the region. So that is what TTP, Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan said. In response to that, in one of its publication, ISIS-K countered that by stating that ISIS-K is a collection of the most righteous elements of the Islamic or Islamist groups in the region and beyond. So now these two quotes provide a picture, a somehow more or less I will say, a broader picture of different aspects of ISIS-K. So that is why I will talk mostly in four thematic areas within ISIS-K. The first one is their existence. Started like, I mean, Dr. Jadoon provided a very comprehensive analysis of how it started, and then while I will also somehow connect some dots with its origin back in 2000 late 14 and 15, but I will also talk about where the group stands now. And the second point is the existence of gateways or portals between not just terrorist entities in the region, but beyond. So there is, from the beginning, there is this very active portals between these organizations. Portals mean that mostly file and ranks are moving back and forth. And the third one is the audience, whom ISIS-K are targeting as their potential audience. And the fourth one, of course, is their fronts, which fronts ISIS-K is fighting. Now, that fighting is ideological, that fighting is theoretical, that fighting is also, unlike what we know ISIS-K for, it is brutality and violence. That is only one front that ISIS-K is engaged in, while they have many other fronts that they're actively fighting. So these are the 4 points that I will be talking. Now, the first one is their existence, current existence is, I mean, the caveat here is that ISIS-K is still somehow shrouded in secrecy. In other terms, there are different opinions, there are different perspectives about the nature, it is potential strengths and weaknesses of ISIS-K. So that thing exists there. Now, my understanding from ISIS-K is, from the beginning, is analyzing or drawing inferences based on their materials as well as materials of other like-minded organizations like the Taliban insurgency before they returned to power in Kabul, or TTP materials that they're so mostly my analysis is both based on their narrative or their content. So now, based on that, where they exist, the organization initiated or originated in a very fragmented manner. So at least we can point out there are evidence that is suggesting that simultaneously it evolved in 3 places. One is in northwestern part of Pakistan, which is most like more exactly in the Orakzai agency in Pakistan. And then there was another group which was in eastern Afghanistan, mostly in the mountains near Tora Bora in Jalalabad in eastern, and also another group was in Helmand province. So somehow they evolved at the same time, or they originated at the same time as a result of Pakistan Army operation in North Waziristan in 2014, when they disseminated all these foreign actors, including the Uzbek movement, the Eastern Tajik or Uyghur fighters. So they were disseminated into different parts, and then they pop up in different regions. And finally, the three of those they came together in eastern Afghanistan. While in eastern Afghanistan, they tried to seize territory. So they were mostly like they emerged as a territorial organization. Now that is important because that having territory didn't work for ISIS, or it didn't work well for ISIS-K. So that is why currently their material is not suggesting any clues that they're focusing on seizing some type of territory. So it is no more a territorial organization. They exist very in a loose manner. Small groups, maybe not more than 10, 15 people living in different places, and all are loosely connected with each other. Now, the logic behind this type of evolution is that they learn. Like, I mean, one thing about terrorist organization or extremist organization is they're very active learners. They learn from their own experiences and from the experiences of their like-minded other organization. And the lesson that ISIS-K effectively learn is both from ISIS-K core as well as from Al-Qaeda and other organization is if you do not have a type of nationalistic motives in your insurgency, you are not able to control a territory. Now, ISIS-K core was able for some time till there was this type of nationalistic or more broader nationalistic understanding of Arabism and all these things in the Middle East. But when that diluted, it didn't exist anymore. So that is one of the reasons that ISIS-K currently, they don't somehow, at least their material is suggesting that they're not focusing on seizing territory. Now, so it is loose, small networks, small groups, and they exist in different parts of the country. Now, one of my conclusion that I took it from mostly from their stories that they're publishing it, that within these small groups there are different groups of different origins. Though recently they're not talking mostly in terms of what origin are there, they're just vaguely mentioning foreign elements or mahajir. Mahajir mean like the immigrant or the refugee, which is a very sacred idea, especially in Islamic history, in Islamic literature. So that is where they exist now. The second part here is, here I also want to include one other point is that the Taliban in Afghanistan, their opinion about the existence of the Taliban is somehow different from what the ISIS is projecting in their documents. The Taliban believe that after their crackdown on ISIS, mostly Afghan and Pashtun elements, so they liquidated hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. So they thin out mostly the local militia or elements of ISIS-K. So then they disappeared. But recently the Taliban believe that somehow they see ISIS-K as a mirror image of their insurgency. So now they believe that they have gotten some sanctuaries at the other side of the Duran land or in Pakistan, mostly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, as well as in some northern regions. And the Taliban also claim that there is an open route between northern agencies in Pakistan, in eastern Afghanistan, all the way to Central Asia. So that is, but at the same time, some material of ISIS-K also, and also my research indicates that when they were disseminated from the eastern part of Afghanistan in 2020, which Dr. Jadun also mentioned, the coalition, also Afghan army and Taliban crackdown on ISIS-K. So they were somehow disseminated into different parts, and some of them they took refuge in western part of Afghanistan, which somehow the attacks in Iran is indicated that that part is also active now. Now the second theme that I want to talk about is the existence of portals of or these different types of gateways between the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Taliban in Pakistan, Al Qaeda, as well as ISIS-K. Uh, uh, the reason for my this conclusion is that when you analyze their contents, uh, it shows that one of the main target of ISIS-K is those file and ranks of these different organizations. And within the last couple of years, we also have some anecdotal evidence that a couple of suicide bombers in their proclamation videos that they publish after the attacks. For example, one of them was an element of Haqqani network. And then in its message, he was upset with the network, how its policies evolved, how it became more as a state-oriented type of organization. So that is why he shifted or he used this portal to go to ISIS-K, and then he committed a suicide bombing. So that is just, I mean, we have a couple of anecdotal evidence, but at the same time, the ISIS-K materials are indicative of that these the file and ranks of these other like-minded organizations are the prime target for ISIS-K to attract them towards themselves. Which this take take me to my third point, which is the target audience. Who are the target audience of ISIS-K? Mostly, before going to the target audience, there are three types of literature within what ISIS-K is publishing. Like you mentioned, Dr. Altuna, their names of their publications, mostly of ISIS-K, like different translation of the term, the voice of Khorasan, which is in Pashto, it is the Khorasan Ghag. Recently, since 2024, they also start publishing the same magazine under the name of the Nidai Khorasan in Urdu language. And also it is in Farsi in English. So the target, mostly the materials are three types of material. One are mostly very emotional or emotive language, short stories. They claim that they are real stories, but with the name of changes of names of characters. So these are very raw, emotional, infused type of literature that they're presenting. Now, who are the audience of this type of literature? Are the public, because its language is very plain. And you can even, like, I mean, when you read them, you understand that it is written not by some like a religious scholar or something. It is written by very ordinary person. But the language, of course, is highly, like, you can see those raw emotions, feeling, as well as very emotive. Within the public, the literature that is targeting public is also ISIS-K within their different magazine have this one section of religious education. It's very preliminary, basic educational materials. Like, for example, the obligation of fasting, or the obligation of prayer, or the obligation of jihad, but at the same time it is also ideological. Now, what is the need that they're providing these type of materials or literature to the public is because it is to present them with their own interpretations. So within these fundamental basic literature, ISIS-K is then they go in a very plain language and they present their own very literal type of or original type of interpretation. So that is within one target group, the public, and the language is more emotive. And the second one is within their literature is hermeneutics, which is mostly highly religious texts. That is not like, I mean, if you're reading it, if you do not have a type of background in Islamic studies or interpretation or hadith or jurisprudence, you may not understand it well, or at least Islamic history. Now they're very long pieces within their different mediums or platforms, uh, and the target of these are religious figures. Uh, they are not for ordinary people. They're a type of these religious arguments that they're trying to convince, or they're at least trying uh, to hold an upper moral hand in terms of these arguments. They're very the interpretation is one thing that I notice within the interpretation. For example, if it is a hadith or a verse from Quran, the interpretation are mostly focused on the specific type of line of interpretation that goes back to 12th century AD, mostly Ibn Taymiyyah, and then coming down to uh, Abdul Wahhab al-Najdi, and then somehow also Abdullah Izam, which was the modern ideologue of Al Qaeda. So this type of interpretation, which is very literal interpretation, the original form. You see these names, like I mean, you find these names many times in their writings, but they are hermeneutics, they are translation, they are interpretation, different interpretation, and highly sophisticated in terms of reasoning in logic. And then the third argument, the third type of literature is mostly for their peer groups. So these are mostly ad hominem type of materials. Ad hominem mean they're very like, I mean, cursing is there. Like, I mean, it is a type of uh, uh, like like it is boring, but at the same time, like I mean, the language that you're using, it is attacking individuals. For example, within the last 3 4 months, their material are attacking the guy Al-Julani in Syria, and they're putting all these bad names like the heretic, the apostle, and all these different cursed names. They attach them as a prefix or suffix for the name. Now, the group, the target of this type of literature is mostly, as I said, the peer group. Why they do that? Because they're trying to convince, for example, TTP fighters to come leave your leadership because your leadership is now deviated. You need to come here. And that argument is there. And you need to join us because we are the righteous ones. Your leader are now corrupted. They deviated. So this is the three types of target audience within the literature. And then my fourth point is multi front battle. As I say, I mean, we know ISKP because of the brutality that they're inflicting, suicide bombings, uh, uh, but that is, as I said, is only one front that they're engaged in, while they opened multiple fronts. Now, some of those fronts are, of course, violence is there. One thing about, I don't want to forget that about the literature or the writing is highly violent. Literature is there. So it is I can argue it is a type of a total violence. Now, the multi-front that they open is based on what they're putting there in their material is I can identify 3 or 4 different fronts. The first one is a battle against the what they call the tasawwuf or Sufi Islam, which is a bit more like, I mean, they uh, they're blaming the Deobandi madrasa or school of thought as being Sufis or Tasawwuf, while the Deobandi is saying no, we didn't evolve as Sufis. The origin of Deobandi school of thought was as a opposition to the Sufi Islam, but then ISIS-K is blaming Deobandi. So that the war against Sufism in Islam, mostly Barelevis in Pakistan. That is one front. The second one is which also take us to Western Afghanistan, that some of their circles still exist. There is a very proactive and active battle or fight against, not in physical terms, mostly in terms of literature, is what they call that the Rafizun. Now, the Rafizun is a term that in medieval Islam was referred to the Shia Islam after the great schism that happened. So the Sunni, or some scholars, they call the Shia Muslim as the Rafizun, meaning is rejectionist Islam. And they're actively using that language in their literature. And the target is, of course, the Islamic Revolution or the Islamic government in Iran. And in recent months, that Rafizun and Fatimiyun terminology became more prominent in their publications since a sectarian war erupted in Parachinar in Pakistan, which was like, I mean, that war has been there, or that sectarian conflict is there at least for 40, 50 years. But this year, this was the most brutal one. This was the most brutal one, that many people were killed, brutally killed from both sides. And when you read ISKP material, is they were actively engaged in inciting that violence against the so-called Rafizun, or the rejectionists, which is the Shia Muslim. The third front that they open is against, of course, the Deobandis, or the Deobandi Madrasa. That is in Pakistan. That is also the Taliban are from the Deobandi madrasas. Now, their argument is, the main argument is that Deobandi is not within, unlike what they claim, is it is not within the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or the owners of Sunnah, of prophetic tradition and consensus. While they're saying the Deobandi school is a very active and very prominent Sufi Islam. So that thing is there against the Deobandi. And the second and the fourth front that they open is against, and that is where they're blaming the Taliban in Afghanistan as well as the Taliban in Pakistan to become, and that is a war against secular ideologies. Now, two terms that is very prominent in their literature is, one is territoriality, which they call that wataniyat. So watan, a term, is actually an Arabic term, but then it also common in Farsi, in Pashto, even in Urdu language. So the term that they're using for territoriality is wataniyat. And they're blaming the Taliban in Afghanistan of following that secular idea of wataniyat, as well as TTP, or the Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan, that why an active type of criticism is there, because the argument is an ideological argument, and that is going there is that there are no boundaries within the Muslim Ummah, or the Muslim nation, the term. While if you're following wataniyat, which is territoriality, you are deviated. Now, in the second term that they're using it in addition to wataniyat is qawmiyat. Qawmiyat or qawm is, I don't know if it is having Arabic origin, but it is a common term in once again in Pashto, Farsi, as well as in Urdu. Qawmiyat is identity, or ethnicity, or in modern language, we can say it is nationhood. So the two argument, or the two quotes that I presented at the beginning of my presentation is originating from this idea that they're blaming the Taliban in Pakistan, that you are following this qawmiyat in wataniyat, or territoriality, as well as ethnic identity or ethnicity or nationhood, while there shouldn't be these type of divisions within Islam. So that is mostly their battle in their literature, in addition to that very broad battle that they're doing it in terms of suicide bombings And so pretty much that is what I have it here with me. But at the same time, there are also some other points on how they converge ideologically with the Taliban and what are the common things among them and what are the divisions among them. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer that. Uh, so I will get back to you, Dr. Altuna. If you have any questions for me, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really a rich description of the current state of affairs regarding ISKP's communication strategy and not only. Let's transition slowly to the Q&A session. Let me be a bit repetitive again and remind you that we're accepting questions. There's already a bunch of them, but just for those of you that are hesitant, please do. And just before we proceed to your questions, dear audience, I'd like to just direct a brief question myself to uh, each of our speakers, just to let you cool your voice. Let me address Dr. Jadoons first, if I may. And it might be difficult, but one question crossed my mind, and I like to ask you about the which you addressed briefly, but I want something more specific about the current relationship between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State in Afghanistan. You know, there's other regions where ISIS branches that have emerged from AQ splinter groups, such as I don't know the Sahel, for example. So we've seen different a range of dynamics, if I may say, from direct clashes between AQ and ISIS branches to even indirect cooperation, and sorry, shaped the relation. I mean, shaped by the relationship between mid-level brigade leaders. How would you describe? Does this description match the current situation in Afghanistan right now?
That's a great question. So I think when we think about any rivalry between militant groups, including Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, um, there is organizational level rivalry, right? And then there's individual level. So in the case of Afghanistan, Pakistan, there's one characteristic which defines, I think, much of these militant groups is that they are practical in their cooperation with other groups. So sometimes, even if it doesn't make sense strategically or ideologically, if there are gains to be had in the short term, groups will cooperate. However, I would argue that the Afghanistan-Pakistan situation is a little bit different when it comes to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. So they're not friends, they are rivals. But one of the biggest, I think, reasons for this is that Al-Qaeda is very much aligned with the Taliban. And it is a part of ISKP's strategy to be opposed to the Taliban, and they have continued with this. The other element, I think, is that Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Pakistan is fairly subdued compared to some of its other branches, such as AQAP. I think the goal being that Al-Qaeda sees this Afghanistan, Pakistan as being its long-term base, but doesn't necessarily want to create trouble for its patrons, the Taliban. But also AQIS, Al-Qaeda and Indian subcontinent, is more focused on sort of uniting these different disparate militant groups, and it hasn't really been that active in conducting attacks. So kinetically, it's not as active as Islamic State in the region. So I think there's sort of a divergence there. If it was, then we would probably expect to see more violent clashes. But I think this rivalry is it's taken the form, I would say, of the rivalry between ISK and the Taliban. And I think what we may see growing again as a rivalry, which is kind of linked to this Al-Qaeda equation, is intensification of the rivalry between the Pakistani Taliban, as Dr. Ahmadzai mentioned, and ISKP. So initially, we sort of saw ISKP restrain itself and its criticism of TTP, I think primarily because a lot of its own members were former members, right, of TTP. But we are seeing this shift, which may intensify um, in the future. So just to sort of say, sort of come back, I think the rivalry, the Al-Qaeda-IS rivalry in Afghanistan, Pakistan is manifesting itself through the rivalry between the Taliban and ISKP because the Taliban are sort of underneath the surface still pretty much tolerating Al-Qaeda.
Thank you very much. And my question for you, and I'll really leave the space for the audience. My question to you, uh, Dr. Ahmed Zay, will be kind of a classic. I really appreciated how you let's say structured the different enemies or front the organization is covering, but let me use some classical terms. I know they're no longer in fashion, but if we had to split, let's say, the enemy between the far enemy and the close enemy, according to your remarks, the close enemy, العدو القريب, takes a quite larger space in their propaganda. So, two things: how are they framing the battle with the, let's say, faraway enemy, and how is this enemy being described as a crusader, as an invader, as a neo-colonialism kind of wave? It depends a bit of the on the geographic, let's say, scenario, but I'm interested in knowing how do they frame that enemy in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So of course, I mean the at the foundation of all these extremist group or religious extremists is mostly, I can say, the so-called the infidels. Uh, but yeah, I mean that thing is the near enemy and the far enemy is uh, that that binary is there, but in terms of their material, is the focus is more on the closer enemies. And the reason for that is, for example, uh, their rivalry with the Taliban in Afghanistan now. Now, one thing I want to note here is at the beginning of, when ISIS came into being in late 2014, there was a very cordial relationship with ISIS core in Sham in Iraq. Both of them were having they were like the Taliban insurgency at that time. They even sent some warnings for media outlets in Afghanistan not to talk bad or negative about ISIS. Uh, at that time, but soon it turned south. Soon it turned sour, and there were reasons why that happened. But why they're very brutal against the Taliban is because they considered the Taliban as the puppet of that faraway enemy. So that is why the goal is, yeah, if we can find someone that they're willing to carry types of attack, for example, in these faraway lands, we will not lose that opportunity. We will of course take that opportunity, but the main battle is here. Because why? Because we are fighting with the puppets of those things. For example, within the last year that the war is happening in the Middle East, uh, with that war, they intensified their their propaganda against the so-called Rafizun or the Shia or Islam the Islamic State in Iran. And the argument is that if you read them, that those are the people who are the Rafizun or the Hamas, because the Hamas is a puppet organization for the Rafizun and they want to expand Shia in Palestine or all these things. So you see, that close enemy is mostly the focus. But of course, as a rational entity, they're not losing any type of opportunity to operate elsewhere, because that operation elsewhere is a very classic terminology in terrorism study, is because if you conduct those attacks, that gives you life, that is your life, that you exist in news. and that is bringing more news to them. Like, for example, the attack in Moscow, or there were a couple of planned attack in Germany, also in Belgium. So that is bringing them more news. Otherwise, uh, the the closer enemy is the more feasible to target and also the most significant one.
Okay. So, thank you very much. Just a couple of clarifications. I said the event was going to run, given that we're two speakers instead of three, from 60 to 75 minutes. Unless you tell me the country, I'll make it 90 as our usual time because there is a shocking number of questions, and I'd like to allow space um, to answer most of them. And I beg your pardon a second time after being or labeling myself as a liar, to beg you to try to be brief. I know some of them are deep and complex, and you'd probably be able to take hours addressing them, but just to allow space for everybody. And I'll try to balance between uh, both of you. But of course, if you want to say something or add something um, to any of the questions, just please do. So my first question that I have for you, and I'll think I'll address it to you, Amira, is how does ISKP's rise compare to the early trajectory of other ISIS affiliates, and what lessons could be drawn that's a bit more difficult from these comparisons?
That's a great question. So I'm actually working on a book project which is near completion with my colleagues Daniel Milton and Jason Warner, where we are comparing ISIS affiliates around the world to really understand what is it about an affiliate which allows it or makes it more likely to be successful. So I think ISKP compare, especially if you look at its trajectory between 2015 and 2018, the uptick was pretty remarkable to the extent that I believe it was in 2018 that ISKP was named as one of the deadliest organization in the world. And then again, it achieved that position in 2022. So I think those are good indicators that ISKP as an affiliate compared to other IS affiliates has really performed sort of much better in terms of the metrics that we commonly use, such as attack numbers, lethality, recruitment, etc., but also in its ability to absorb the counterterrorism losses that we saw between 2019 until 2021. Like I mentioned, the U.S. was engaged in counter ISK operations, drone strikes, in combination with ground operations, with the Taliban attacking ISKP, and then also the Pakistani government putting pressure on ISKP's growth on the other side of the border. So despite all of that, I think ISKP's ability to just survive, I think even indicates that it has more sources of strength than other affiliates. Now, why, you may ask, is ISKP performing better? I think in part due to the environment and the access it has to this pool of recruits, which have been in the region historically, right? Like I mentioned, there's a lot of history in the region and jihadism which has evolved. So those are the underlying sources of ISKP strength, but I think there's something there to be said about the structure of ISKP. It's sort of fluid membership and it's sort of its operations as an umbrella organization, I think really have worked to its advantage compared to other affiliates.
Sorry, I just mute myself. Dr. Ahmed Zay, what relationship, if any, does the ISKP have with the Turkestan Islamic Party?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. So I briefly touch upon the, like, I mean, the how ISIS-K emerged is one group that was dispersed from North Waziristan was the North Eastern Turkestan, or the Uyghur or Uyghur in local languages, that group, and also the Uzbek Islamic movement. Now, the Taliban literature accepts, especially in 2017 in 18, Taliban accepts that they relocated those two groups mostly to Afghanistan at that time. The Uzbeks were relocated mostly in Helmand province, while the Uyghurs were somehow somewhere in eastern part of the country. And then when ISIS-K became like consolidated in eastern part of Afghanistan, so that became an integral part of ISIS-K. Now, one of the studies that I conducted mostly in terms of the structure of ISIS-K is, I believe, in my study indicates that there is this duality of structure, meaning local elements as well as foreign elements. Foreign elements are mostly the core of the organization, while local elements are the protective or the periphery of the organization. Now, when the organization was in eastern Afghanistan, the periphery or the protective layer of organization was mostly the Pashtun tribal militia. Very uneducated, not educated, brutal. They committed very brutal. While the organization shifted to northern Afghanistan in late 2020 and onward, that that layer was thinned out by the Taliban. And then in northern Afghanistan, mostly non-Pashtun element came into there. So coming to the point here is, it seems like, which is going back to the previous question of the relationship with Al Qaeda, is there is a core of the element of this organization that is protected by the Taliban, by Al Qaeda, and that is the foreign elements of ISIS-K. Now, in 2014, there are evidences suggesting that some elements they flew from or they came from Sham in Iraq to Pakistan and then to Afghanistan. They were like in some thousands, and we do not have any evidence where they disappeared. They just disappeared in thin air. And even Taliban are very mute about. They're not talking about those foreign elements. So the understanding is that those people are still there, and there is this coexistence between Al Qaeda and those elements of ISIS-K. But one thing that happened after the Taliban came to power, one thing that the Taliban did was they removed or they replaced those Uyghur fighters and Uzbek fighters from northern Afghanistan somewhere else. Where? That is not evident where, but they were removed, and the force behind that removal or relocation was the pressure from China, because China didn't want those elements there because of the potential for China and its security. Though China really fortified that very tiny border with Afghanistan, but still, like, I mean, they were removed from there. And the group that removed from there was one group within the Taliban that is led by a Uzbek Talib commander, which is from Afghanistan, but ethnically he is Uzbek. And where they are, we do not have any evidence.
Let me now frame a question. I believe you can both wedge in, which is can you speak more about ISKP's role or current role in inspiring lone actors? I may add in the West. If any of you wants to start, I believe you both of you can wage definitely.
Yeah, sure. I can weigh in on that. So I think ISKP's ability to influence individuals who are based in Western states is considered to be um, one of the core, or I would say the high risks associated with ISKP when we look at it as a transnational threat. But I think we need to sort of take a step back and think about this is part of a bigger phenomenon, which is also happening in other types of violent extremism. So we see a wave of right-wing extremism across Europe, across the world, and a lot of these the mechanisms of online influence, of reaching out to marginalized individuals, giving them a framework which incentivizes them or makes them feel a part of a bigger community, those mechanisms are very similar. I think Islamic State now, compared to any other transnational group, is the most active in mobilizing individuals in Western states, and you can see that in its propaganda. Its propaganda features not just local issues for some of the states in South and Central Asia, but they have a lot of commentary on what's going on in Western states. If there's an incident of Quran burning, that will be highlighted and that will be used to sort of instigate tensions between Muslim communities and their Western host communities. So I think a lot of the mechanisms are similar of online radicalization and influence. It's just that Islamic State Khorasan has made this its one of its top priorities, and we are seeing the associated outcomes of that.
Would you like to add something, Haddad?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I mean, as Dr. Jadoon mentioned, is that is mostly a type of pragmatic mission for the organization. They will not invest in sending some operatives from AFPAC area or somewhere to the Western countries and finance their travel and all these things. No, they will not do that because they have big fish to fry in that region and they need to spend that resources there. But they will not let go any opportunity of these lone wolf if it emerged somewhere in Western world, and they will extend their support in terms of technical virtual support and whether that is training, that is ideological, whatever, because in their literature, there is no evidence to suggest that though the Taliban government in Afghanistan believed that the operatives that carried the attack in Moscow was trained in some border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then they were transferred there. But their literature is not indicating anything. So, on the contrary, the dominant understanding is that they were virtually trained or they were recruited virtually. So they will take that opportunity, but they will not invest limited resources that now they're having after all these uh, to send someone or operative to carry these attacks.
Okay, let me throw another question. Could you briefly discuss the nationality or ethnic makeup of Islamic State Khorasan and its current form? I don't know who, just let me know who prefers to address it, trying to strike the right balance. And being brief, I beg you, I apologize for doing that.
No, it's fine. I will give my input. So based on my understanding, so initially it was primarily Afghan and Pakistani nationals, but and you would have a sort of smattering of sort of Indians. We have Uyghurs, but now this has grown a lot more to include the Central Asian states such as Tajik, Uzbek, and then obviously you have the regional states. Um, I would say in terms of additional profiles, what we have seen are the arrests internationally. One dominant nationality has been Tajik. So I think a lot of Central Asians are involved in the international plots, whereas in the local sort of Afghanistan, Pakistan region, the perpetrators tend to be of the countries in the region. That is my understanding.
Yeah, exactly. So now, one thing that somehow the dynamics of conflict in Afghanistan and Pakistan is shifting or changing because Pakistan conflict or violence is becoming more, I will say, ethno religious, if I can use that term, or ethnicity-based nationalistic type of thing, which is not having a strong appeal for ISIS-K because they're like, I mean, borderless type of very universal global jihad, all these things. Well, TTP is moving towards that thing that, hey, we need to have some type of government or any type of within the existing geography of Pakistan, or we have the Baloch insurgency, which is a highly ethnic type of insurgency. The other context that provide for ISIS-K is Central Asia serve as a ticking bomb for ISIS-K because of the oppression, because of the, like, I mean, as Dr. Jadoon mentioned, the Taj from Tajikistan, uh, and they're targeting those also, those people, and that has a very high potential for Central Asia, both Uzbek or fighters from Uzbekistan, from Tajikistan, as well as fighters from Sunni sect in Persia, in Iran. And that is why they're also targeting them in their materials. So they have high potential to join ISIS-K.
Okay, let me address the next question to Dr. Jaddoun. Uh, Somebody from the audience noted that well, following your coverage of ISKP history, uh, IS or Islamic State Hind appears to be defunct, and Islamic State Pakistan does not appear to be very active. Do you see ISKP moving into these countries to fill that vacuum?
So I think IS Pakistan, which was created around 2019, has seen a few shifts. I think it kind of works in tandem with ISKP, um, but I don't think it will go away. So ISP has been conducting attacks, but at a much lower scale and very much more sort of targeting religious leaders or other leaders of local communities who have been critical of ISKP. Um, there was a time when Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was a part of IS Pakistan, but it was reabsorbed into ISKP. So I think part of it is also a management perspective, right? A management approach where Islamic State is aware that militant factions are very prone to internal disagreements, especially when it comes to leadership positions, and especially the Pakistan-Afghanistan region. So it could be that maintaining these entities as separate allows for better management and will mitigate the risks of internal conflict within the leaders because we see that happening. IS Jammu and Kashmir, what we see is that it's morphed into IS Hind. But again, I think its goals and its tactics and also I think its ambitions are much different than ISKP. So I doubt that these entities will be merged into ISKP because ISKP is on a different trajectory, and IS Hind and IS Pakistan do conduct some attacks, but at a much lower scale. But they're targeting different audiences, and they can do a better job of tailoring their propaganda to the grievances of the communities that they are trying to recruit from. So IS Hind is focused on recruiting Indian Muslims. So it's going to continue focusing that and probably sort of compete in its propaganda with AQIS in that region. IS Pakistan, again, is more focused on Pakistan, but not KP, not Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as such. But it could change.
Okay, Dr. Ahmed Zay. Uh, Next question is probably the last one before the last. How should counterterrorism approach the expansive multilingual propaganda campaign or effort being carried by Islamic State Khorasan?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, how, according to you, could the counterterrorism community approach the expansive and growing multilingual effort carried by Islamic State Khorasan?
I mean, admittedly, I'm not a counterterrorism expert, and I don't have any experience. I'm studying these different uh, extremist groups and from more like scholar type of under scholarly lens. But the point here is what I can say is that in terms of their materials, I don't know how effective they are uh, because they're publishing a lot. Uh, so my assumption will be that they're maybe more effective in among those folks who have a type of predisposition to these type of ideas, these type of things. Because one thing is that their materials are like, I mean, reading them is like, it's very boring. It is like, I mean, it is not that the type of thing that will attract you. It is violence. It is boring. And I was reading one of the questions there. Someone asked, like, I mean, how they are. Like, I mean, for example, the English text is mostly a Google translation. So, and then you can make out that these are like, I mean, a paragraph is put there in Google and Google translated that from Pashto to English. Like, I mean, that type of thing most of the time. I mean, counterterrorism, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, sorry, I cannot say anything about that because I don't have any experience.
That's fair. And just last question, because I've seen it repeated twice or three times. Maybe you can both answer it. Dr. Jadun, maybe from an organizational, if you know, approach, and Dr. Ahmed Zay from a communicational approach, which is, do you see any role unique for female recruits in IS Khorasan ranks? Are they targeting them through their propaganda? Do we have any knowledge of? Yeah, I think the question was clear.
So I will be interested to see if Dr. Ahmadzai has seen any in terms of ISKP material. I have been keeping an eye on women's involvement in militancy in the region as a whole. So what we do know is that women have been involved in militant activities in the region, but more so as, mothers, wives, daughters, where they have the role of supporting the roles of men who are a part of these militant groups. So a call to recruit women for active roles in Afghanistan, Pakistan is very rare. But what we are seeing is, we know there's been several examples of the Baloch Liberation Army using female suicide attackers, which is a change from the trends that we have seen in the past. Another development has been that the Pakistani Taliban, I think they've released about six, seven women's magazines in the past 2 years, which we have actually analyzed, which again is very ideological and is calling for women's support and more passive roles. But again, these are indications that the trends are changing and that groups may pivot to use women in more active roles. Now, with Islamic State in general, we already know that they are very open to using and employing women in various roles, as they have done in Iraq and Syria, in Indonesia, Philippines, and various other countries. So Islamic State in itself doesn't really, it does create room for women's roles. What other influences sort of determine the roles women play are the organization and the environment. Like I said, if other organizations are pivoting to recruit women, I don't see why ISKP won't turn to that direction if it hasn't already. In the propaganda that I have reviewed for ISKP, I haven't seen any specific calls for women, but I could have missed something. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that we see a focus on within ISKP.
Dr. Ahmed Zai, any last remarks regarding this last question?
Yeah, I will be brief on that. Yeah, I mean, as Dr. Jadun said, like, I mean, especially those elements who is in this AFPAC region of ISKP, it has a very distinct gender role. So, like, I mean, Though, like, I mean, the Baloch insurgents, now we have some suicide bombers and they're highly educated, all these things. There is a new phenomenon. But in the classic way, like, I mean, women always, like, I mean, was not an active part of that. Though, within ISIS-K literature, there is a role of women in a couple of places. So the one thing, especially their short stories, is almost every story has a story of this warrior, this very heroic warrior, and eventually he is getting married. So that marriage is part of their stories, like, I mean, as a reward. So you see, like, I mean, that is in the short stories are mostly towards public. So that reward is there. Now, there is also one thing when I was doing a research and I interviewed people within the southern district of eastern Afghanistan where ISIS-K was there. That was their headquarters for at least 2 years. Based on local people, there were women fighters mostly among the foreign elements. Uh, they were having those women. Those women were seen by local people, especially those foreign elements were moving from the local area to mountains, I don't know, for training or whatever, but not among the local Pashtun elements. That was exclusive to the foreign Uzbek, Uyghur, Arab fighters. Women were there. But there is also one other thing, one other rule of the woman is currently when SSK is heavily criticizing al-Jolani of Syria, one of the source of criticism is like they're putting in their material is that Jolani went to Turkey with his wife, and then they took photos with Turkish president, and that became a very strong element for against their propaganda against Al-Jul. Like how dare, like I mean, how deviated, morally deviated you are that your wife is going there. So that a very strict gender type of role, that image or those imageries are there within their literature. Uh, I mean, how many elements are there? I mean, I think that no one knows that. How many women fighters or elements are within their ranks?
Well, okay. Just no, I'd like to thank I don't even have time. It has been so engaging that I don't even have time to a very long space for closing remarks. I just would like to thank you for so generously sharing your knowledge with us, as well as our audience for their engagement. Has been more than 20 unanswered questions. I apologize for that. And of course, I wouldn't like to forget our technical team and to thank them for their impeccable organization. I just hope it's been an engaging and informative event. It goes without saying that we look forward to welcoming you all again and soon, of course. Finally, yes, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated, sorry, for future events, activities, of course, publications at our website, extremism.gwu.edu. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter and on Blue Sky. More recently, under ads GWU POE, and of course on our YouTube channel where you can find this episode soon. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. See you soon.